We are now in Romano Guardini's book, The Lord, on chapter 11, Blessing. In this chapter, Romano Guardini is going to take us through the concept of blessing, what it means, and he has three biblical references in the New Testament. Jesus blessing the children, the blessing of the bread and wine that become the body and blood of Christ, and the fact that he blesses the apostles when he parts from them. In Bethany, he lifts up his hands and blesses them on the day of ascension. So you have these three primordial moments of blessing in the New Testament, and Guardini considers these heavy with meaning. The blessing of children, of the bread and wine, of the apostles in the final hour, he says. If we glance from here, he says, back to the Old Testament, we see the connection. Blessing at the beginning and at the end of sacred history. So, blessing is connected to sacred history. So he's going to take us through. And on the fifth day of creation, God spoke his blessing over the living creatures in the waters. And he blessed them, saying, increase and multiply, and fill the waters of the sea, and let the birds be multiplied upon the earth. And on the sixth day, after he created man in his own image, as man and wife, he blesses them. And he says, increase and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and rule over the fishes of the sea, and the fowls of the air, and all living creatures that move upon the earth. Genesis 1, 22, 28. And after all things have been created and found good by his all-seeing eye of truth, God blesses the seventh day. Think about that. On which earth was completed. It's the day of his own repose. Then, however, tragically, the blessing is destroyed. It sort of jars us when we're reading Guardini. We're moving along through this account of blessing. And then he says it's destroyed. Man sins. And following on that, God curses him. And with him, the earth and its fruits and all his labors, and even his wife's womb. Genesis 3, 16 to 19. Now, for Guardini, he reminds us there's this movement of history. At the end of time, blessing will return. Eternal blessing with it. However, with the eternal blessing is eternal malediction, depending on how people have chosen to follow God's love. And he says, to those who have believed in the name of Christ and who have tried to practice his love, the judge of the world will say, come, blessed of my Father, take possession of the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. But to those who have closed themselves to this love, depart from me, accursed ones, into the eternal, everlasting fire, which was prepared for the devil and his angels. Matthew 25, 34, 41. So, between beginning and end in the long period of human history, the blessing appears anew, says Guardini here. Not that original blessing, that has been destroyed, as he mentioned, but another is given. And he mentions Noah after the mysterious flood, when God makes a covenant with him, foreshadowing the covenant to come. in seeing that in Genesis 9. Then what Guardini calls the real covenant. Now, so why does he say that? Then the real covenant with Abraham is sealed, and with it blessing upon all who are called and obeyed the call. It seems to me that the reason it's called the real covenant is that it depends on Abraham's listening and following, whereas Noah's is a general blessing renewed to all creation after the destruction of the flood. So he goes on. Abraham's descendants are to be the hearers of, the bearers, the bearers of sacred history. And someday in the impenetrable future, one of them is going to give birth to the Messiah. Genesis 12. In him, it is in him that the second blessing will grow ripe and full. So already Abraham and his choice to follow God, to hear God, and to obey him becomes the platform for the coming of the Messiah. And that's why I think Guardini refers to that as the real covenant. Okay. So now Guardini makes a qualification that's important. He says blessing is directed to living things. Inanimate things have their fixed measure. They remain as they are. Animate things, though, contain a secret source from which flows the mystery of beginning. They grow and multiply. Thus, the connection he earlier stated about be fruitful and multiply. It is to this mystery of increase that blessing is applied. Increase in the vitality of body and spirit as proved by their fruits. Blessing stirs inner depths, unsealing some hidden spring. Okay? It can be applied to everything that has imminent life. So, in contrast, malediction is barrenness. It chills and closes, renders life inanimate and sterile. The cursed womb does not bear. The cursed field runs to weed. The cursed singer finds no new song. The blessing that the dying Jacob speaks over his sons is full of such bounty, this sense of multiplication and increase. Then he says there's another kind of blessing, that which accompanies our doings, brings luck. It makes the eye see clearly. It directs the word to the proper ear, causes the work to succeed. The Old Testament often speaks of such blessing. It's upon the head of Jacob, whose every undertaking is successful, and of Joseph, in whose hands everything flourishes. It rests upon the victorious weapons of David. But with Esau and with Saul, it's different. They are unblessed. So now Guardini goes deeper into this mystery. He says, once the womb has borne fruit, the seed has sprouted, the work is begun, it is time for the crowning blessing of fulfillment. Okay? And then he reminds us, existence is hardly favorable to completion. There's this mystery of like incomplete existence. Okay? The paths of Earth's activating forces cut into each other. Okay? One's going one way, one going the other. Right? And one might speak just as correctly of universal chaos, okay, as of order. And he goes on to say, sometimes malevolent forces seem to hover over a task, kind of like a giant example of Murphy's Law, right? Hovering over a task. Actually, he says, carefully preventing its completion. There's no guarantee that what is well begun will be well ended. When it is, then, as the result of a particular blessing, it's a rare and wonderful thing. It's much more usual, Guardini says, that the enemy intervenes, the form is broken, the promise fades, the necessary energy peters out, the lightning bolt falls. Blessing, in this context for Guardini, is the power that releases the fertility of living things and brings them to fulfillment. Only he is blessed who can also create. Hence, the desire to bless rather than be blessed would depose God. So ultimately, I think Guardini is saying here is that one has to look to God for blessings, that we cannot manufacture the gift of blessing. And he uses this incompleteness of existence to point that out. And he reminds us that if we seize upon the demand to be the blesser rather than to allow God to be the blesser, we're usurping God's place. Okay? And that's important to understand. But even with this insight and the previous insights at the beginning of this chapter, we're still, says Guardini, only on the periphery of the subject. Nor until Christ's advent do we learn what blessing really means. So what's required to really understand blessing is the coming of Christ. Okay? And Guardini emphasizes this. All the blessing that exists is focused on him, Jesus, the Lord, the Blessed One, with a capital B and a capital O, the Blessed One, to whom all power is given in heaven and on earth. Okay? Matthew 28:18. He himself is the living power of salvation, from whom blessing streams. Okay? So, you have to see it that way, according to Guardini, in order to get to the heart of blessing. And then he reminds us of the 3 times that Christ blessed specifically. Even though we're focused on those 3 times, he reminds us that Jesus the Lord's whole existence was a fountain of living water. So, and not for nothing, Guardini reminds us that old Christian poetry sings of him as Christus Sol, the radiant, warming, life-sending one. Or we say, quoting the Old Testament, the Sun, S-U-N, of justice, right? But he's going to go back now to the 3 blessings that he mentioned at the beginning of the chapter. And he says the 3 blessings in the New Testament are but 3 rays from his Son. Okay? So, start out with the blessing of the children. He says, when the children are brought to him, he embraces them, lays his hand on their heads, and blesses. Probably, Guardini says, this is their physical and emotional development, their early destinies together, for they are inseparable. But the blessing goes deeper than mere corporal well-being, bodily well-being, warmth of heart, and earthly success. It's penetrating to the profundity of God in man. So the blessing of the children for Guardini goes all the way to the heart of the incarnation. Okay. So, and we saw this before in Guardini when he's talking about the guardian angels. And he reminds us of a deeper reality to the way the guardian angels are guarding children. And this is something we should need to focus on, especially those of us who have responsibility for children, either in our families or in our church programs. So look at this deeper blessing. He says the ultimate sense of Jesus' blessing is that the children of earth become children of God, sons and daughters of the Heavenly Father. That next, their physical and intellectual fecundity, their spiritual develop, that their earthly struggles and labors may harvest invulnerable sheaves for heavenly barns. So obviously this is like a mouthful, but for Guardini, our earthly struggles and labors are oriented toward eternal harvest. Now, this is really very, very important. This connection between so-called earthly labor and sheaves for the heavenly barns is integrally connected because of the incarnation. So this is not a question of the diminution of labor. Labor gives dignity. Labor is a blessing, okay? And I think that's really important, because there's a tendency in our society right now to demean labor, to demean hard work. This is not an incarnational view of the dignity and the blessing of labor. Then we move to the next blessing at the Last Supper. Christ takes bread and blesses it. No question here, he says, of kindling the festivity of a group of guests or of seeking truth in the sanctifying of bread and beaker. Or, as Plato's immortal symposium of consecrating an hour of friendship in which spirits ignited by the spark from a great soul take off in joint flight for the realms of eternal beauty. What Guardini is saying, it's not like any of those things. He wants to remind us what's at the core of the blessing of the bread and wine. It's not those fanciful flights that are mentioned here of a party or of even seeking the truth like Plato. I mean, these things can all be good, but they're not the point of the Eucharist. Here's what he says the point is. The bread is blessed that it may become the body of Christ, who offered himself in expiation or atonement of our sins. And the wine in the chalice is blessed that it may become his blood, poured out for the sins of the world. Blessing, he says, opens the recipient to a fertility not of this world. Okay, so we're talking about a heavenly bread. okay, that becomes the body and blood of Christ. And listen to what he says. It's a superabundance that comes neither from the plenitude of the Spirit nor contact with higher powers, okay? But it's solely from the redemptory love of God's Son. Goes back to the question, you believe in redemption, don't you? Do you believe in the redemptory love of God's Son? Because that is the meaning of Eucharist. Okay? And then he says, from that redemptory love falls food and drink for the newborn life, giving strength for the toil and trials and struggles of the Christian day. Okay? So we have Eucharist for the journey bread. Okay? Finally, Jesus blesses his disciples that they may go out into the world. Says Guardini, not to build empires or to make history, but to carry the sacred message of love to men. To choose love. I think that's really important. So based on that redemption, they're being sent out to love. He says the battle against worldliness is to be fought on all fronts. Okay? The seed of the new creation sunk into history. So every time we bring this blessing of this new life of God's love, we're fighting a battle on all fronts against a spirit of worldliness, says Guardini. And he says, with this, what this final blessing means is not clear until Pentecost. Because I'm going to add to this, because Pentecost is that moment of fulfillment of the blessing. That's where we're sent forth to witness to the whole world. Who is Christ? He says, the spender of blessing. He says, not one in the row of great healers and saviors. He's no new conjurer of the mysteries of winter's curse and summer's blessing, of the cycle of death and fecundity. Rather, he is the Son of the living God. He's the habitant of that eternal inaccessibility beyond the reaches of world myth and mystery. He does not step into man's world from that of nature, issuing neither from her light nor from her dark mystery of fertility, nor self-revealed from the silent depths of chaos. He comes, listen to this, impelled only by the free, pure decision of divine love. There's that redemption again, which knows no other law than itself. Wow. His blessing comes of that omnipotence expressed in the words, all power in heaven and on earth has been given to me, Jesus says. See? Matthew 28:18. It's the power of sowing holy life. It's the power of fertility and growth. It's the power of protection, guidance, and completion. It's the power of judgment. Jesus' blessing redeems us from the curse, not as the sun frees from darkness, or the golden hero of a saga frees from the claws of the dragon. No. The curse is the judgment of the Lord himself, the Lord and the creator of the world, upon his mutinous creatures. So people choose to go the other way and they wander into the curse. It's not an independent power in itself aimed at God. It's the actual punishment that God himself has placed upon the heart that is turned against him. And it is from this that Christ frees us. So, He frees us, like the Christmas song goes, joy to the world. He frees us far as the curse is found. Wherever the curse is found, he frees us from it. Okay? He says, Guardini reminds us, evil is null and void before God. It's able to exist at all only because the creature whom God created good has become wicked, entangled in error, and hardened by revolt or rebellion. Christ's holy strength can overcome it and does overcome it. It overcomes it. The battle is a bitter one, not because evil is difficult for God to conquer, but because man's heart refuses to learn. And then out of that refusal to learn, Guardini ends this chapter on one of the most chilling notes of any of the chapters. Listen to this. Listen to this. Thus, he says, it is the voice of a petrification, almost absolute. So things are really bad, which declares we would be spenders of blessing. We want it all to ourselves. Not blessed. No, we'll just spend the blessing. It means we creatures would be creators. Gods. God and Christ and salvation are rejected in this kind of attitude. This is very, very dark. And it's one of the darkest endings to any of Guardini's chapters. So I believe he leaves it here as a warning. Listen to this. Where this will to dominates, the will to reject God, Christ, and salvation, where this will dominates and is realized, man closes himself against that abundance which comes from sacred blessing. That's chilling. Then, he says, though prosperity may seem to bloom and ripen, in reality there is desert. Benedict XVI talks about the desertification of the modern world. The desert, right? There it is. Even in a prosperous situation, it's a desert spiritually. He says, then the sun also rises, spring still comes, deeds are accomplished, and children born. But everything, says Guardini, in this condition without Christ, everything is sealed in eternal sterility. Let's be reminded to turn back to love and choose God's love in his redemptive way, in his blessing of children, in his blessing of the Eucharist, and his blessing of our mission. Thank you very much.